And good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you happen to be sitting at this afternoon or at the moment watching the webinar. Appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. We're going to be looking at some of the commands that Ben mentioned. I kind of grouped them together and just call them some bonus tools in survey. These are things that I get asked about a lot by customers in training and in demonstrations. And so I thought I'd take an opportunity to go through these and kind of introduce all of them to you guys. Um, First thing we're going to talk about is a question that is always fun talking to a customer, and they say, "Well, in Carlson, can you just start at a point and draw a line at an angle and a distance? Just type that in." And believe it or not, there are multiple ways to do this. I guess that's because it's CAD. There's always multiple ways. So most of these are on the COGO menu. Uh, we can do a line by angle and distance. One of the unique things here is it uses this angle code where there are 10 different options. You can access the list of options. You don't have to memorize these. And then one of the other interesting things with this command is there's a explicit exit function at the end. Otherwise, it just takes you back into it and starts looking for more information. You can always just escape out of it once you're done too. COGO locate by angle and distance actually has 5 different ways to do this. We'll look at all of these in CAD here in a few minutes. But by default, it's only going to draw points. The draw line by angle and distance only draws lines. It doesn't draw points. But you can turn on, there's a function under COGO to draw a line, and you can turn that on, and that way it'll draw the line and the points. Locate by angle and distance uses a format for entering that angle where it's a quadrant, degrees, minutes, and seconds, and it'll display this little outline of that with the QDD MMSS layout for you, kind of remind you what we're doing there. And then, of course, we can do the same thing with the COGO traverse command. We can enter that kind of information. And like the locate by angle and distance, there's an option. You can turn the line on and off. You can also have a raw file stored, which may be helpful depending on how many of these you're putting in and what the purpose behind that is. A lot of folks want to do this, enter these as part of entering a boundary description. That works great as long as it's all linear, no curves in the boundary. Curves get a little bit tricky with some of these. So going back and forth between locate by angle and distance and draw arc and getting back in. You can also use visual COGO to do these. And so we'll take a little peek at that and see how that works. When we think about that quadrant and the DDMMSS format, most of you are probably aware of this, but quadrant 1 is in the upper right, the northeast quadrant, and they just go 2, 3, 4 around the quadrants there as we're entering those. So if you weren't aware of that, there you go. That's how those are all set up, and there's an example of a 45-degree, 25-minute, 25-second angle in quadrant 1 over there. We'll also be looking at the inner deed description, which uses that same quadrant format. It does include an option to do arcs, and that will allow us to go through and enter a deed and do a number of additional functions. So part of what I'm driving at is if you just need a line, we got tools for that. If you're actually entering a deed description, this is probably a better option for you here. So at this point, let's go ahead, and I think I'm ready to start playing with these. So we'll jump to my other screen and see how much trouble we can get in here. All right, so I've got Carlson 2022 open. I'm just in the default drawing number 1 here because we're just going to play around a little bit. And we want to go ahead and get started here. And we'll go to our COGO menu. and run down here to this line by angle and distance. So I can pick any point on the screen, or if I have points already entered that have point numbers tied to my coordinate file, I can go ahead and type one of those in. So I'll just randomly pick a point here. And there's my bearing code 5. Anybody remember what bearing code 5 is? Well, that's why we type H for help. And there I get that whole list. So I'm going to switch that to code 1 for northeast, to a simple 45 degree. And you'll notice it's doing degrees, minutes, and seconds. So in this case, that quadrant is separated out from the degrees, minutes, and seconds. And we'll go a distance of 100 feet because it's a nice round number. And it's ready to do the next line. So you can see how it's kind of set up what it's doing there. It's looking for the angle bearing code. We want to pay close attention with all of these commands to the command line. There's constantly information down there. We can look at the options here, and we'll see these with at least one of the other commands. So we're being prompted for the angle and not worrying about the horizontal angle on this one at this point. Here's the explicit exit. So we'll type E for exit, and there's my 100-foot line. And just for verification, we'll label it, and yes, it's 45 northeast, 45 degrees and 100 feet long, just like we wanted it to be. All right, so that's fairly simple and straightforward if all you need is a line. If you want points on the end, I was going to check one thing here real quick. What happens if I go to points? Yeah, it wants me to pick a point number to establish that bearing. That's what I thought it was going to do to me. All right, and we'll see that functionality again in another command here. So let's go and look at locate by angle and distance. And like I said, there are multiple methods there. The other thing I want to point out here is right now my line on off is on. And you switch this simply by clicking on it. So it's off now, and it's on now. So as I do these various commands, it's going to draw the line and place points for me. So let's start with the line bearing. We'll just pick a point to start at. I don't have any point numbers. And so this is the same thing that we saw with the previous command under the points option, where I have an option to, if we look down here, I can use a line. So I could pick this line to establish the direction I'm going. I can put in a bearing. I can put in 2 point numbers to establish the direction. Or I can pick 2 points. Pick the first point and then it'll prompt for the second point. In my case, I want to just go ahead and do the bearing. And there's that familiar quadrant format that we're working with. And you'll notice if you want to, you can switch over to azimuth. But we'll just match that first line here, and we'll do quadrant 1, 45 degrees. If it's an even degrees, I don't need to put in zeros for the minutes and seconds. We'll do the same 100-foot distance. And there we go. Point elevation. Well, we don't want an elevation. We'll make sure that goes to 0. And since it's placing a point, it wants a description. So we'll just call it point. All right. So this is point 11. Why is it point 11? Well, probably because I was playing around with this earlier, and in my point defaults, I didn't get my starting point number set back to 1. So we'll do that now. All right. So pick a point to start. It draws the line because my line on off is toggled on, and it sets a point at the end. It will not, doesn't set one here, but if I had a point there, it would. All right, it'd already be drawn. Let's go back and let's try this by turned angle. Define the occupied point and backsight point. We'll do this by points. And I don't necessarily need a point number. So I can actually come in and say, well, I want my occupied point to be at this end, and my back sight point can be point 11. So I'm standing here looking that way, and we're going to turn just degrees, minutes, and seconds, so I don't need a quadrant here. We want to turn 45 degrees, use our 100 foot, zero elevation point, and so from here looking this way, we turned an angle of 45 degrees to get to point 1. Right, so that's using the locate by angle and distance by turning an angle. We can use an azimuth. Pick our beginning point at 1. I'm being really simple here and using 45s and hundreds, but I think the idea is the important part. So there's my 45 degrees, zero elevation, point. So the azimuth is pretty straightforward. We can do this by bearing. And now may be a good time to point this out. These first 4, you'll notice, have 2 letters in parentheses after the command. Those are shortcuts you can type in at the command line to run these commands rather than going through the pull-down menu for them. So we'll go by bearing. We'll start at point number 2. And now we're getting our quadrant format again. Okay. So let's do quadrant 2. Well, we'll see what we get here. I kind of messed that up, didn't I? We'll do a distance of 100 feet. It looks like it's going 90 degrees on me here. Zero elevation points. There we go. We'll go ahead and try that one more time, starting at point number 3, quadrant 2. Calculated bearing. Not quite sure why I'm getting a calculated bearing there. Let's try this again here. Point 4. Okay, because it's asking for, I'm only giving it 2. I'm not giving it any kind of a bearing. Quadrant 2, 45 degrees. It's called user error, guys. I was just giving it the quadrant and not giving it the angle. All right, so hopefully everybody caught that. If not, you'll get a copy of the recording with all my errors in it later. All right, so the last one up here is by delta. So what we're looking at here is, what is the delta northing? So what's the change in the northing? Say 45 feet. The easting, we'll do 45 feet there. Elevation, 0 change in elevation, point. And so I don't know what this length is, but what I can tell you is that it is 45 feet north and 45 feet east of 0.5. All right, so those are the 5 options to use with the locate by angle and distance. And the other one we talked about on the Kogo menu, the traverse. And you'll notice it's got me sitting at 0.1 and 5. It's looking for an angle bearing code, and if we hit help, you'll find that this is kind of the same function as what we had before. All right, so we'll go ahead and see if we can get started with this guy. Same options we had with that first command with the 10 different options. For anyone who's not familiar with GONS, it's breaking up a quarter of a circle into 100 degrees rather than 90 degrees to make it easier for calculation purposes. So let's go ahead and send this to the southeast. We're going to stick with that magical 45 degrees and 100 feet. Elevation of 0. There's our point. And there are options to go ahead and tell it that you don't want to be prompted for descriptions, so you can turn those on and off as well. You'll notice because this is a traverse command, it advanced me to this point. So now I'm working off of this point. And we can go ahead and just move our way around on that. Again, the traverse command has an exit function, so we'll go ahead and exit there. And I'll take this opportunity to remind you that the traverse command drew the line in addition to the point because the line on-off is checked on. Kogo, we also have the visual Kogo option, and you can start it with a number of different functions here, but we'll jump into the traverse. Always interesting to see where it thinks our occupied point is. I would just as soon have it start right about here. What the heck, let's start it over here. All right. And we'll go back to traverse and see if that worked, resetting the occupied point. So we'll go ahead and have a 0 rod height. You have options for going northeast using all the same options we saw before with the traverse command. Zenith angle can be that, or it can be your vertical angle, or you can do a delta Z. And then the horizontal distance, or you can do slope distance here. So if we give it a 45 degree, zenith angle of 0, actually 90, and a horizontal distance of 100 feet. Using the point description, we're toggled on to create the point and to draw the line, and those are optional. So we'll go ahead and store point 8. And there we are. We should have point 8 up here on the end. So it works very similar to the traverse command. If we move on from here, we can tell it that we're going to go to the northwest using the same details. And there's point 9. When you're done, you just hit exit. So any of those that you're comfortable with that seem to fit the data that you have, you can utilize those to go through and create a line at a bearing in a distance or an angle in a distance from a selected point in CAD whenever you need to do that. Lots of different ways to do that stuff.